Wait. So I don't have to send this camera back to you guys? You're saying that I can just keep this? So if I wanted to give it away to somebody that's watching, I can do that as well. Oh,
So who is this camera for? Well, I was lucky enough to get some hands-on time with a pre-production version of the Fujifilm X-S10, and after spending a few weeks with a final shipping model, using it in varying environments and testing out the raw files, I think I have an answer to that question. Let's get this started. The Fujifilm X-S10 is a stark departure in terms of the design and cadence of Fuji's product strategy that they've laid out over the recent years. Instead of the rumored X-T40, users are introduced to a new product line that looks to take some of the best philosophies of two premium product lines. I've included timestamps for this review in the description, so check those out if you want to hear about a specific subject. But before I talk about the images and what this camera can do, let's talk about how it's built. The X-S10 takes its design cues from the X-T4, X-H1, and even the X-T200 to some degree. I've talked about it before, but this grip, it just fits like a glove. When you pick it up, immediately you're greeted by this grip, and it just feels incredibly comfortable. Seriously, this camera feels secure in a way that many Fuji cameras don't, where I never felt like I needed to have a wrist strap when I was using this device. The X-S10 also levels up from the competitors in that it employs a magnesium alloy build that just feels really premium when you pick it up and hold it. When you look at the top of the camera, it has this very interesting aesthetic to it that is minimal in some ways and also feature-rich in others. You have a dedicated ISO and quick menu button on the top, but you also have a dedicated record button right next to this shutter. And this allows you to capture video regardless of what mode you're in. But we'll talk about more of what this can do later. Let's go back to this design. You'll notice right away that you have these two unmarked dials and a mode dial that gives you 4 custom options along with the auto, SP, and filter options. Now, why? Why did Fuji go in this direction? Well, quite simply, it's to make this more user-friendly. If you're asking me, the X-S10 is preparing to take shots at the space that's taken up by the Canon M50 and the Sony a6000 series of cameras. It's looking to target people that are not really familiar with the Fuji space and are looking to get started with a digital camera solution. Fujifilm has willingly excluded their signature retro look in favor of something that is more approachable for someone that's looking to create great imagery but not feel like they have to learn the exposure triangle right away. If you're a creator that's coming over from a point and shoot or mobile solution, not even talking about price, just the way it's designed, the X-S10 is aimed at your consideration. And if I'm being honest, if you're considering this against some of the other cameras that I mentioned, I gotta say, this is noticeably better looking than both of them, and that might matter to some creators. I mentioned it in my first impressions. When you look at the top profile of this camera, I really am impressed by this cool, strong lines. It looks to mimic a Leica SL2 without being that close to it. Okay, listen, I'm not telling you it looks like a Leica SL2, not by any means, but just those strong lines where it comes down and across, that is very, let's just say, impressionist of that camera. I like it. I really like how this camera looks. And we've talked about it on this channel before. Sometimes, for some people, that will be a deciding factor. If you have a camera that looks good, that feels good, it makes you want to pick it up and use it more often than not. And Fuji looks to have considered that when putting this together. So I had to get more time with this camera before I finalized the review, and I gotta give a shout out to the team at Moment for sponsoring this video, and they sent me this camera, which is really nice of them because typically we send the cameras back and they said, no, you can keep it. And well, you know what happens on this channel, right? If we get something, we're probably just gonna give it away. So more about that later. But getting my hands on this again with some time removed,
my opinion in the first impression hasn't changed in terms of the handling. I really think that this is the most comfortable Fuji mirrorless camera to date. The grip is just far more pronounced than the Fuji X-T4, and it just gives you plenty of room to wrap your fingers around and get the shot. The shutter button, I'm a little mixed on it. You know, some people are probably not gonna think this is an issue at all, and there's some people that are gonna be butthurt by the style of this. I think it's okay. It does require a bit more attention to capture an image than the X-H1 did with their feather release, but I'm just not quite a fan of this style in terms of the shutter button.
Now the Fujifilm X-S10 comes at $1,000 US for the body alone, and for that you get quite a bit of functionality. Namely, you get a brand new image stabilization unit that is 30% smaller than the one you'd find in the X-T4 and promises up to 6 stops of image stabilization. You also get their latest in autofocus technology, which, you know, in my testing has never been on par with what Sony is offering in their premium cameras, or even Canon for that matter, but it is still really, really, really good. For all the videos that we record here, we rely on eye and face detection, and in the field, in studio environments, this has proven to be useful as well. So for many creators, this is gonna be plenty good for the content that they're capturing. And on top of that, you're gonna get all the offerings that the Fuji X-Trans4 sensor and 4th generation processor bring. 26 megapixels, 18 film simulations, 4K at 30p, full HD at 240 frames per second, F-log recording, and more. Again, it's just a shit ton of value packed into a very portable package. Fujifilm has seemed to have made the right decision to make this a camera worth considering, you know, almost regardless of the type of content you're looking to produce. But let's talk about this. What can the camera actually do? Well, Fujifilm hasn't really pulled many punches there either. The S in the X-S10 is synonymous with small and lightweight, secure grip, simple controls, and stabilization. That's a lot, but at the end of the day, how good is this camera? Really fucking good. I've long talked about how great this sensor is and shown a ton of my work across the X-T3, X-T30, X Pro 3, X100V, and X-T4. Look, you're getting the same sensor, and that's not a bad thing. You have something that's tried and tested, and more importantly, gets the job done.
It's crazy to think that this camera, especially at its price point, you're just getting all the top tier features you'd get from like a Fuji X-T4. So like, you know, we're using it out here, and just the ability for it to focus really quickly. We're using it with a lens with OIS, and you know, you get all that great sensor technology with the X-Trans4 that they've, you know, developed and improved with all these firmware updates. So out on the street, it just performs. Whether it's video or photo, it just performs. And you know, it's just this democratization of creative technology that keeps happening. That really allows you to tell your story as best as possible.
Unlike the bare sensor that you'd find in an X-T200, there's no compromises with this thing. There's no limitations. You have all their film simulations and ultimately a really high ceiling to express your creativity. And that's an important factor when you're making your decision on whether this camera is right for you. This also means that you get other features such as 425 autofocus points and up to 30 frames per second continuous shooting in electronic shutter mode. These are all coming together to really make a compelling case for this camera, something that holds its own against the market at this price point. On the video side, there's a couple of trade-offs made. 4K recording is at 30p, and you can record 10-bit internally. But I'd argue that the target audience for this camera are not too worried about those features. Even at 200 megabits per second, the video files are plenty rich. Yes, you can expand this with an external recorder, but again, out of the camera, you have files that work well for YouTube and social media. When I was using this camera in the field, I never felt like It was limited in a massive way, but I knew there was a clear line of demarcation between this and the X-T4 when it came to video functionality. That being said, if you are primarily leaning toward photo and image creation, and you want to do a little bit of video, and that's sort of your hybrid mix, the X-S10 makes a really compelling case. But with all these nice things said about this camera, it's not without its faults. There's some clear ways that this camera could be better. I hate to sound like a broken record, but the exclusion of a UHS-2 card slot and going with that UHS-1 card slot, well, it feels like a bad joke at this point. I mean, you have something that can shoot up to 30 frames per second in continuous shooting, but that buffer fills up in 2 to 3 seconds. So if you're in a fast-moving environment or wildlife, it might not keep up with what you're trying to capture. And that might section off a small group of creators, but I feel like by now, 2020, going into 2021, is it not ubiquitous to have a UHS-2 card slot? Maybe not. I'm not the engineer, but again, this is just my opinion. Another thing I should say is that I was hoping that the final production unit would have a bit of a change from our pre-production model. I'll tell you, with respect to the buttons, the shutter button is a huge improvement from the XH1, where it's not sensitive to just looking at it, where it's gonna capture a photo or video unintentionally. But the record button and the ISO and the quick menu button, I feel like there should have been more differentiation between these three. On the back, the menu and display buttons, they are just a little too recessed for my liking. I feel like it should have come out a little bit more just to make for a more comfortable shooting experience. This might be different for you, but again, in the weeks that we had time with both a final unit and a pre-production model, it was something that I felt was lacking. And the last thing that kind of bothers me about this camera is the lack of that SCM switch to change your focus type that, many Fuji cameras have. You don't have that on this camera, and really it feels somewhat criminal in a way. I mean, if you're someone that's looking to get started, looking to get better, I don't think that the inclusion of this makes the camera more intimidating for your production process. And then when I look at this exclusion and the fact that they included a filter mode on their mode dial, it really makes me wonder why certain concessions were made. Anyway, maybe I'm making a mountain out of a molehill here, but to me, I felt like this inclusion was a step in the wrong direction.
All right, if you watch this long, you're wondering, how do you get your hands on this X-S10 with the 18 to 55 millimeter lens? How can you win this thing? Well, it's quite easy. Number one, make sure you subscribe to the channel and leave a comment that you have or you've been subscribed, whatever it may be, because you need to be subscribed if you want to win this thing. I think that's only fair. Number two, if you want additional entries into the contest, I'll leave a link in the description. Standard exclusions apply to certain regions, but this is pretty much a worldwide contest. So this can go to the Philippines, to Europe, to South America, anywhere in the world. There's going to be one winner of this package, this X-S10 and the lens. Go to the link in the description for additional entries, and the winner, I'm gonna decide it on this date right here. Now, I know what the date is, but just in case, I'll put it in post. So again, subscribe to the channel, let me know in the comments that you've subscribed, and go to the link in the description for additional entries. Why did I do that? I just ruined the whole take.
Despite some of the pain points that I had with this camera, looking at it more objectively, it definitely shoots up to the top of the list, around the top of the list if you're looking at a hybrid camera that's in the sub $1,000 price point. If I'm weighing this against the market, it isn't the best sub $1,000 option if you're only doing photography or only doing videography. But if you're in a space where hybrid capture is key, this can be the camera to get. With its very angled display and user-friendly design, this camera not only differentiates itself from a second-hand X-T3, but also other cameras on the market. In short, it's not a camera that enthusiasts and pros will gravitate to, but the X-S10 inserts itself into the conversation of what's the first camera I should get. And if I'm being honest, from a business standpoint, that might be a more important conversation to be a part of if you're Fujifilm. The Fujifilm X-S10 is a study in economics and trade-offs. You have a camera that makes strategic choices to place itself on the short list for many creators this holiday season and months to come. In a time where interest is increasing and spending power is diminishing, a camera like this is a welcome addition. You give up weather sealing, but you get a premium build and finish. You relinquish 4K 60, but you get a lightweight monster with IBIS. And if I'm being honest, you give up a bigger battery and UHS 2 card slots for something that lands just under $1,000 US. To understand why the Fujifilm X-S10 exists is to understand economics and product design in 2020. What stands out to me is that the concessions made on this camera seem to line up with more of the rules of economics than they did to arbitrary rules that some manufacturers may do to try and differentiate product. It just feels like this product design makes sense. There isn't something that feels like it was ripped away from you unnecessarily. This camera is designed for those that want to take phenomenal imagery and document that experience with some great video functionality. And it's definitely a camera that you should consider when you're asking yourself, what's that first digital camera I should get? And while I personally won't be keeping this camera, I can see a huge group of people gravitating to this solution and telling some great stories.
All right, I just want to pop in real quick one last time to give a shout out to the team at Moment. They didn't ask me to say this, but I'm just going to go ahead and say that. They have a great selection of products. They offer free shipping, and usually I get it in a couple of days, even across the border, and that's fantastic. So if you're looking for something that you want to take your creativity to the next level, check out Moment's shop. The link is in the description. They are doing fantastic things for the creator community with their grants and sponsored projects that they're doing. And they're really supporting the community, not just, in North America, but globally. So they didn't ask me to say that, but just with all the great things that they're doing and so much goodwill that they're putting out in the community, I felt like I had to give them that shout out. And let's be honest, I wouldn't have this to give away if it wasn't for them as well. So, kudos to them for that.
There you have it. That's my review of the Fujifilm X-S10. I hope you found that valuable, but more importantly, I'd love to continue the conversation in the comments below. If you're not already, do consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications so you know when a new video comes out. As always, my name is Gajan. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.